In the 41st millennium, death is the kindest mercy the Imperium can offer. But what happens when something arrives that has spent centuries begging for death and cannot find it? The Inquisition had faced demons, heretics, and Xenos abominations beyond counting. They had purged worlds and condemned billions to the Emperor's judgment. But they had never encountered anything quite like the thing that walked out of the warp rift above Hive Mortis, trailing shadows that screamed with 1,000 forgotten voices. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions, where even chaos itself learns the meaning of fear, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the Dark Millennium, and you'll want to see where this blood-soaked journey leads. The rift had opened without warning during the third watch, a gash of impossible colors that hung above the underhive like a wound in reality itself. The Arbites had cordoned off 6 sectors. Astropaths had screamed themselves blind trying to read its nature. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the rift collapsed. But not before something fell through. He landed in the Crimson Quarter, a maze of rusted hab blocks and narco dens where the Imperium's light had never reached. The gangers who controlled these streets, the flayed sons, brutal even by underhive standards, found him first. Alucard stood in the center of their territory, a tall figure in archaic red clothing, wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. His white gloves were pristine despite the filth coating every surface of the underhive. Orange-tinted glasses reflected the flickering lumens, hiding eyes that had watched empires crumble and gods bleed. "Well, well," he said, his voice a deep purr that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. "This is certainly different." The flayed sons surrounded him. 30 gang members armed with autoguns, chain blades, and the cruel confidence of men who'd never met something they couldn't kill or corrupt. Their leader, a brute named Karch, whose face was a patchwork of ritual scars and metal studs, stepped forward. "Lost, off-worlder?" Karch's augmented jaw clicked with each word. "This is flayed territory. The toll is everything you own, and maybe we let you keep your life. Maybe." Alucard tilted his head, studying them with the interest a bored child might show an anthill. The air around him seemed to thicken, shadows pooling at his feet despite the harsh lumens overhead. When he smiled, his teeth were very white and very sharp. "How delightful," he said. "I was worried I'd arrived somewhere civilized." Karch raised his stub pistol. "Kill this!" The world became red. What happened next would be discussed in terrified whispers throughout the underhive for months afterward. Those who claimed to have seen it from the shadows spoke of impossible things. A figure that moved faster than thought, that became shadow and smoke and something with far too many eyes. They spoke of screams that ended too quickly, of blood that fountained upward in artistic sprays, of bodies torn apart by hands that passed through metal and flesh, like they were equally insubstantial. The flayed sons had controlled the Crimson Quarter for 17 years. They had survived 3 gang wars, 2 Arbites purges, and 1 attempted Genestealer cult infiltration. They lasted 11 seconds against Alucard. When the Blood Warden Arbites finally secured the scene 4 hours later, they found the entire gang district transformed into what one traumatized officer would later describe as a cathedral built from corpses. 37 bodies arranged in perfect geometric patterns, drained completely of blood. The blood itself painted the walls in script, not low Gothic, not high Gothic, not any language in the Arbites' databanks. In the center of it all, a single message in perfect Imperial Gothic, written in arterial spray. "I have walked through the Valley of Death for 400 years. This place smells like home." Security picked feeds showed only static and shadows. Witnesses reported a figure in red walking deeper into the underhive, whistling something that made their teeth ache and their hearts skip. By the time Inquisitor Helena Valeska received the astropathic summons, 14 more gang territories had gone silent. Each crime scene was identical. Perfect carnage, drained corpses, and that same message in languages that predated the Imperium itself. The Ordo Malleus had protocols for demonic incursions. The Ordo Hereticus had procedures for witch cults and heretical uprisings. The Ordo Xenos maintained extensive files on every known alien threat. None of them had ever encountered anything quite like this. Alucard walked through the Underhive's depths, past the starving masses who pressed themselves against walls as he passed, past the corpse starch processing plants that reeked of rendered human misery, past shrines to the God Emperor, where hollow-eyed priests preached of suffering and duty. He found a high vantage point overlooking the Hive's industrial heart, where millions of workers toiled in conditions that would have been called slavery in any saner age. Furnaces the size of cathedrals belched smoke into an atmosphere already choked with pollution. Overseers with shock mauls kept the quotas flowing while tech priests chanted litanies to machines that devoured human life with the same indifference as they processed ore. Alucard lit a cigarette, somehow still intact despite his dimensional transit, and took a long drag. The tobacco was 400 years old and from a world that no longer existed, but habits were hard to break when you were functionally immortal. Fascinating, he murmured. Watching a worker collapse from exhaustion only to be dragged away by servitors, lobotomized cyborgs that had once been human. The Major would have loved this place. An entire civilization built on the principle that humanity's suffering is its greatest virtue. He felt the warp pressing against reality here, a thin membrane between the material and immaterial. It was different from what he'd known. Wilder, angrier, saturated with emotions that had curdled into something almost sentient. His own nature, that quantum state of existence he'd achieved by absorbing the Schrödinger entity, felt friction against this place's fundamental wrongness. He could sense them now, the things in the warp, looking back at him with interest that bordered on hunger. Demons, this universe called them. Entities of pure emotion and belief given terrible form. Alucard smiled wider. "Come then," he whispered to the screaming void. "I've killed a god before. Let's see if yours is any more interesting." In the spires high above, in a chamber sealed with wards and prayers, Inquisitor Valeska studied the Pict captures with growing unease. Her servo-skull hovered beside her, projecting the grainy images again and again. The figure moved wrong, existed wrong. Her psychic senses screamed warnings that made her teeth ache. "Summon my retinue," she commanded, "and prepare the sanctioned psychers. We're going hunting." Inquisitor Helena Valeska had served the Ordo Malleus for 37 years. She had banished greater demons back to the warp, executed corrupted planetary governors, and once stood in the presence of a Grey Knight Grand Master without flinching. She had seen things that would shatter lesser minds, confronted horrors that defied the laws of reality itself. But as she descended into the underhive of Hive Mortis, following the trail of artistic corpse arrangements and impossible murders, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: genuine uncertainty. Her retinue moved in textbook formation around her. Battle Sister Carmilla, her bodyguard, swept forward with her bolter held ready, power armor servos humming quietly. Interrogator Hadrian worked his Auspex scanner, trying to filter useful data from the electromagnetic chaos of the Underhive. Psyker Savant Eli, a sanctioned witch whose eyes had been replaced with brass augmetics, muttered constant prayers to ward off the warp's touch. "Inquisitor," Hadrian said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "The readings are contradictory. The Auspex registers massive life signs at the target location, but also registers 0 life signs simultaneously." "Warp corruption?" Valeska asked, though she already knew the answer. "No, my lady. The warp is calm here. Unusually so. Whatever we're tracking, it's not a demon. At least not any classification I recognize." They had followed the trail to an abandoned factorum, one of thousands that dotted the Underhive's industrial sectors. The bodies had led them here, 23 more gangers. These ones from the Rust Prophets, another Underhive power. Same method. Total exsanguination, arranged in patterns that suggested ritual, but resisted all attempts at interpretation. The Factorum's entrance yawned before them, darkness absolute despite their lumens. Carmilla's armor lights should have penetrated at least 50 meters. Instead, the shadows seemed to drink the illumination, leaving only a void that pressed against their senses. "Eli," Valeska commanded. "Which sight? Tell me what you see." The Psyker's mechanical eyes whirred, focusing beyond the material plane. His breath caught. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "Inquisitor, I see nothing, and I see everything. It's as if something exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, there and not there, dead and alive. It's—" He gasped, blood trickling from his nose. "Emperor, preserve us. It's observing us, observe it." "Weapons ready!" Valeska ordered, drawing her master-crafted bolt pistol. "If it's hostile—" "Oh, I'm always hostile," a voice called from within the darkness, cultured and amused. "The question is whether I'm feeling discriminate about it." A figure emerged from the shadows, not walking through them, but rather forming from them, as if the darkness itself had decided to wear a man's shape. Alucard stepped into their lumen light, and Valeska's breath caught despite her decades of experience. He looked human, superficially. But everything about him was slightly wrong in ways that made her trained eye ache. Too tall, too still, too perfectly composed. His red coat should have been filthy after days in the underhive, but it was immaculate. His smile was pleasant and showed far too many teeth. "An Inquisitor," he purred, examining them with the lazy interest of a well-fed predator. "How delightful! I was beginning to think this entire planet was populated exclusively by gangers and industrial serfs." Carmilla's bolter snapped up. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, identify yourself!" Alucard's smile widened. "So many names over the centuries. Vlad Dracula, the Impaler, the No-Life King, but you may call me Alucard." He tilted his head. "And I am very interested in learning more about this God Emperor of yours. Tell me, is he truly divine, or simply another tyrant who's learned to weaponize faith?" The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on Carmilla's armor. "Heresy," the Battle Sister breathed, and opened fire. The bolt rounds screamed across the distance, mass reactive shells that should have turned Alucard's torso into an explosion of gore. Instead, they passed through him, hitting the wall behind in thunderous detonations that lit the Factorum in strobing flashes. Alucard stood unchanged, now smoking a cigarette that hadn't been there a moment before. "Explosive bullets," he observed mildly. "How quaint. I haven't seen those since 1944. He took a long drag, then exhaled smoke that formed shapes, screaming faces that dissipated into the shadows. "Your turn's over, sister. It's only polite that I show you mine." He moved. Carmilla was a veteran of the Adepta Sororitas, trained since childhood in combat, enhanced by faith and the finest war gear the Imperium could provide. She never saw him cross the distance. One moment he was 10 meters away. The next, his hand was pressed against her gorget, white glove stark against blessed ceramite. "Power armor," Alucard murmured, almost appreciative. "Impressive. I once fought a German super soldier project that used something similar. They burned quite beautifully." His grip tightened, and the ceramite groaned. "But this is better. Faith-blessed, I assume. I can taste the prayers worked into the metal. How does it feel, sister, knowing that your God's protection is the only thing keeping my fingers from your throat?" "Release her!" Valeska's voice cut through the tension, cold and absolute. Her bolt pistol was aimed directly at Alucard's head, loaded with sanctified rounds. "Or I will show you what the Emperor's judgment looks like." Alucard turned his head, only his head, body remaining perfectly still, to regard her. Behind his orange glasses, she caught a glimpse of eyes that burned like coals in the deepest hell. Then he laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass and distant screams, joyous and terrible and completely genuine. He released Carmilla, who staggered back, and turned his full attention to the Inquisitor. "Oh, I like you," he said, delight evident in every word. "You actually believe you could kill me. That's precious." He spread his arms wide, inviting. "Please, try. I've been hoping someone in this benighted universe might prove entertaining." Valeska's finger tensed on the trigger. Every instinct screamed at her to fire, to purge this abomination before it could... "Wait!" Eli's voice, strained but urgent. "Inquisitor, wait! I'm sensing he's not chaos-touched. There's no warp corruption. He's something else entirely, something older." Alucard's expression shifted to genuine surprise. "Oh? Your pet witch has talent. Yes, much older than your Imperium, I'd wager. I was drinking blood and killing peasants when mankind still dreamed of the stars." He cocked his head. "Tell me, Inquisitor, what year is it in your calendar? I'm afraid I lost track during my transition." "The 41st millennium," Valeska said carefully, not lowering her weapon. "The year of our Lord, 41,958. Silence. Then Alucard's smile faded into something contemplative. 40,000 years, he murmured. 10,000 years since your emperor enthroned himself, and judging by the state of this world, humanity has spent all that time perfecting new ways to suffer." He looked around the factorum, at the rusted machines and the corpse-strewn floor. "The Major told me once that I was a relic of a more barbaric age. I wonder what he'd think of this place." "Who are you?" Valeska demanded. "What are you?" Alucard's eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw into the abyss behind them, layer upon layer of death, centuries of slaughter, an ocean of blood deep enough to drown worlds. "I am a monster," he said simply, "who has spent 400 years searching for a human capable of killing me. And I have the terrible suspicion that I've arrived in a universe where such a human no longer exists." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Inquisitor Valeska's bolt pistol never wavered. Carmilla had repositioned, her bolter trained on Alucard's center mass, despite having already witnessed its uselessness. Hadrian worked furiously at his data slate, trying to catalog what they were facing. Eli trembled, his augmetic eyes locked onto something the others couldn't see. The writhing impossibility of Alucard's true nature. Then Alucard did something unexpected. He sat down, not on a chair or crate, but simply folded his impossibly long legs and settled onto the filthy factorum floor as if it were a throne room. He produced a silver flask from within his coat, where it had been stored in a garment that clearly had no pockets was anyone's guess, and took a long drink. "This is tedious," he announced. "We can continue this dance, you pointing weapons that won't harm me making ominous declarations, everyone being very tense and dramatic, or we can have a conversation. I'm 4 centuries old, Inquisitor. I've learned that sometimes talking is more interesting than killing." Valeska's mind raced through protocols, through years of training in dealing with the unknown. This creature had slaughtered dozens, arranged bodies like art pieces, demonstrated powers that defied every known classification. And now it wanted to... talk? "Lower your weapons!" she commanded. Her retinue stared at her in disbelief. "That's an order, but maintain firing positions." Slowly, reluctantly, the bolters lowered. Not far, but enough. Alucard smiled approvingly. "Pragmatic. I appreciate that. Your Imperium seems fond of zealots who'd rather die than think." "You're different." He gestured to the space across from him. "Please sit. I have questions about this fascinating hellhole you call civilization, and I suspect you have quite a few of your own." Valeska remained standing. "You've murdered 43 Imperial citizens. You display abilities consistent with demonic possession. You mock the God Emperor. Give me one reason I shouldn't call for orbital bombardment and turn this entire sector to glass. Because I've killed more humans than most of your demons ever will, Alucard replied cheerfully, and I did it before your Imperium was even a footnote in history. I am Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, voivode of Wallachia. I impaled 20,000 Turkish soldiers outside my capital and drank wine among the forests of dying men. I slaughtered Protestant villages for Catholic masters, then slaughtered Catholics for my own amusement. I have personally ended more human lives than most wars. He took another drink from his flask, and the air filled with the scent of blood. Not fresh, but aged, like wine from a particularly morbid vintage. And when I became a monster, truly became what I am now, I killed even more efficiently. Armies, villages, anyone foolish enough to believe they could stop me. His eyes gleamed behind those orange glasses. The gangers I killed? They were predators, Inquisitor. Men who preyed on the weak because this rotting hive gave them permission. I did your precious Imperium a favor. You're no judge of the Emperor's justice, Carmilla spat. No, Alucard agreed. But I'm an excellent judge of character. Those men were killers and rapists. I could smell it on them. The blood. The fear of their victims. The casual cruelty. I've been many things, sister, but I've never pretended my murders were righteous. He glanced around the factorum. Unlike your Imperium, which seems to have built an entire civilization on the principle that suffering is sacred. Valeska felt her jaw tighten. You know nothing of the Imperium. Nothing of what we face. The horrors at the gates. The Xenos. The heretics. The warp. Alucard interrupted. Yes, I've felt it. An entire dimension of emotion and belief turned cancerous. Quite impressive, really. Humanity managed to traumatize reality itself. He leaned forward, suddenly intense. But tell me, Inquisitor, how much of the horror is external, and how much does your Imperium create itself? Heresy, Carmilla growled, finger tightening on her bolter trigger. Truth, Alucard countered. I've walked your underhive. I've seen children starving beneath shrines to your god emperor that could feed thousands. I've watched workers die from exhaustion while priests preach that their suffering glorifies your corpse god. I've existed in a state of quantum observation for 30 years. I see everything, Inquisitor. Every life, every death, every choice your Imperium makes that values dogma over humanity. Valeska's hand clenched. Part of her, the part that had seen too much, that had executed too many in the Emperor's name, recognized truth in his words. But that part was heresy itself. The Imperium endures, she said coldly. For 10,000 years, we have held the line against chaos, against extinction. Yes, we are cruel. Yes, we are harsh. Because anything less means death for our species. Does it? Alucard stood in a single fluid motion. Too fast, too smooth. Or have you simply convinced yourselves that cruelty is necessity? I served the Hellsing organization. Humans who fought monsters like me using whatever methods worked. They were pragmatic, ruthless when needed. But they never worshipped suffering itself. He walked toward her, and this time Valeska didn't retreat. They stood less than a meter apart, vampire and Inquisitor. Monsters of different breeds sizing each other up. I came to this universe by accident, Alucard said quietly. A warp storm tore through during one of my wanderings. I didn't choose to be here, but now that I am, I find myself curious. His smile returned, sharp as broken glass. Your demons, these chaos gods, they're powerful, yes. Fed by emotion, given form by belief. But they're young, Inquisitor. 40,000 years is nothing to something truly ancient. You claim to be older than chaos? Hadrian interjected, his data slate forgotten. I claim nothing. I simply am. Alucard removed his glasses, and Valeska's breath caught. His eyes were red as fresh blood. ancient as extinction, and filled with something that might have been sadness. I have absorbed 3,424,867 souls, each one a life I ended, a person I consumed. They exist within me now, forever. Part of my power, part of my damnation. Eli gasped, his witch sight confirming what his mundane senses couldn't process. Emperor's mercy. I can see them. Millions of lives layered inside him like the Astronomicon. Alucard finished. Your god emperor consumes 1,000 psychers a day to maintain his beacon, yes? I can taste their deaths from here. Desperate, terrified, believing their sacrifice sacred. He replaced his glasses. At least I'm honest about what I am. A parasite, a predator, a thing that should not exist, but does, anyway. Why are you telling us this? Valeska demanded. You could kill us. Your power is considerable but not limitless in this universe, Alucard interrupted. Your warp interferes with my quantum state. I can't teleport across star systems anymore. My omnipresence is reduced. Combat functional, but limited. He smiled. And more importantly, killing you would be boring. I've slaughtered Inquisitors before. The Catholic kind. They screamed prayers just like your sister likely would. What would that prove? He turned away, examining the shadows that clung to the Factorum's corners. I want to understand this universe, he continued. Its rules, its powers. Whether anything here can finally grant me what I've sought for centuries, a worthy death. He glanced back over his shoulder. So here's my proposition, Inquisitor Valeska. Use me. Point me at your enemies. Your heretics, your demons, your Xenos horrors. I'll kill them with the efficiency that only an immortal monster can provide. In exchange, you help me navigate this new reality, and perhaps, just perhaps, you'll find someone or something capable of ending me. Valeska stared at him, mind racing through implications. A weapon of immense power, offering itself freely. The Inquisition had used worse. Demon hosts, archoflagellants, exterminatus. What was one more monster in service to humanity's survival? But could she trust something that admitted to being beyond redemption? I need to consult with my superiors, she said finally. Alucard's laugh echoed through the Factorum. Of course you do. Bureaucracy survives even the apocalypse. Very well, Inquisitor. You know where to find me. I'll be in the Underhive, doing what I do best. His form began dissolving into shadow. Oh, and one more thing. He paused, half-corporeal, eyes burning in the darkness. Your Chaos Gods? They've been watching me since I arrived. Khorne finds me interesting. Slaanesh is intrigued. Tzeentch tried to read my future and received a migraine for his trouble, and Nurgle simply laughed. The shadows deepened. They're not afraid of me. Not yet. But they will be. And then he was gone, leaving only darkness and the scent of ancient blood. 3 days after the Factorum encounter, the Chaos Cult made their move. They called themselves the Crimson Reapers, a Khornate sect that had festered in Hive Mortis's depths for 2 decades. Their leader, a former Imperial Guard sergeant named Dracovian, had turned to the Blood God after watching his entire regiment annihilated by Orc marauders while orbital support never came. 20 years of bitter prayer had transformed him into something more than human. His skin bore brass runes that wept blood, his eyes burned with warp fire, and his voice carried the weight of Khorne's eternal fury. The Crimson Reapers had heard whispers of the creature in red. The gangers spoke of it in terrified tones. An immortal killer who moved like shadow and left only corpses in artistic arrangements. To most of the Underhive, it was a nightmare. To Dracovian, it was an opportunity. Khorne cared not from whence the blood flowed, and something that killed with such efficiency, such artistry, deserved a place in the Blood God's legions. They found Alucard in the Rust Gardens, a sprawling cemetery of abandoned industrial equipment where the desperate came to salvage scrap and occasionally discover corpses that predated the Imperium. He sat atop a collapsed Prometheum tower, coat spread around him like wings, watching the Underhive's midnight shift change with the detached interest of a zoologist observing insects. 70 cultists surrounded the tower's base. They wore flak armor decorated with the 8-pointed star, bore chain axes and auto-pistols blessed in the blood of innocents, and moved with the coordinated discipline of former soldiers. Dracovian stood at their center, a chain glaive crackling with demonic energy in his hands. "Creature!" Dracovian called up, his voice echoing with unnatural resonance. "We are the Crimson Reapers, sworn to Khorne the Blood God. We have watched you work. We have admired your kills. The Skull Throne would welcome one who slaughters with such dedication." Alucard didn't move, didn't even look down. He merely took a drag from his cigarette, letting the smoke curl into the recycled air. "Join us," Dracovian continued, fervor building. "Embrace Khorne's gifts. Become more than you are. Together, we will drown this hive in blood and ash. Together, we will—" "Tell me something," Alucard interrupted, his voice conversational. "Does your god have a sense of humor? I'm genuinely curious." Silence. The cultists exchanged confused glances. "Because," Alucard continued, still not looking at them, "sending you to recruit me suggests either a magnificent sense of irony or a complete lack of understanding about what I am." Now he did look down, and his smile was terrible. "I'm leaning toward the latter." Dracovian's face twisted with rage. "You dare mock the blood god? Khorne, who drowns galaxies in—" "A child," Alucard said simply. 40,000 years old, perhaps. Born from humanity's violence and rage given form in your warp. Impressive, certainly. Powerful, undoubtedly. He stood, coat billowing despite the stagnant air. "But I have met gods before, little priest. I've killed one. And your Khorne is just another tyrant demanding worship through fear." The temperature spiked. Blood began weeping from the walls around them, forming patterns, the 8-pointed star, skulls, runes of slaughter in languages that hurt to perceive. The warp pressed close, reality thinning as Khorne's attention focused on this insult. Dracovian's body swelled, muscles bulging as demonic possession took hold. His voice became a chorus of screaming brass. "Khorne offers you eternity, power beyond imagining, the endless glory of slaughter." Alucard tilted his head, genuinely considering. "I already have eternity," he said. "And it's quite boring, thank you. As for power—" He stepped off the tower, falling 40 meters to land with no sound at all, standing amid the cultists like a crimson ghost. "Let me demonstrate what that actually means." The first cultist lunged with a chain axe. Alucard caught the roaring blade in his bare hand. The chain teeth shattered against his palm like glass against steel. He looked at the cultist, a young man, perhaps 20, eyes wide with a zealot's madness, and smiled. "You believe your god made you strong," Alucard whispered, and his hand closed around the man's throat. "Let me show you what strength looks like when it's not borrowed." He pulled, and the cultist came apart. Not ripped or torn, unraveled, as if the threads holding him together had simply decided to part ways. Blood sprayed in a perfect sphere, coating the nearest dozen cultists in their comrades' remains. Then Alucard moved. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an education in violence. He flowed through the cultists like water through a sieve, each movement precise, economical, devastating. A white-gloved hand punched through ceramite-reinforced flak armor like it was paper. A casual backhand sent 3 cultists flying into the rusted machinery with enough force to leave human-shaped dents. When they tried to surround him, he became shadow, reforming behind them to continue his lesson in mortality. The Crimson Reapers were veterans of 100 battles. They had stormed imperial fortresses, slaughtered Arbites' precincts, performed rituals that turned entire hab blocks into charnel houses. They fought with the fury of corn burning in their veins, with demonic strength augmenting their bodies, with the absolute conviction that the blood god would reward their sacrifice. Alucard killed 40 of them in 90 seconds. He didn't hurry, didn't waste movement. Each death was deliberate, almost thoughtful. A cultist's head separated from his shoulders with surgical precision. Another found her heart removed while still beating and crushed before her fading eyes. When 5 rushed him simultaneously, he became intangible, letting them pass through before resolidifying to tear them apart from behind. Blood soaked the ground, screams echoed through the rust gardens, and through it all, Alucard hummed, a tune from 4 centuries past, a waltz that had played in aristocratic ballrooms before the concept of nobility had become something else entirely. Dracovian watched his cult dismantled with growing horror. The demonic possession gave him strength, speed, made him nearly invincible by mortal standards. But watching Alucard work, he recognized something that transcended mere power. This wasn't a warrior. This was something that had refined killing into an art form across centuries. "Enough!" Dracovian roared, charging forward with his chain glaive trailing warp lightning. "Blood for the blood god!" Alucard caught the blade between his palms. The demon-forged weapon screamed as it contacted his flesh, reality warping where they touched. For a moment, they stood frozen, corrupted soldier and impossible vampire, testing strength against strength. Then Alucard pulled the glaive from Dracovian's hands and broke it across his knee, like kindling. "Your god gave you power," Alucard said conversationally, grasping Dracovian by the throat and lifting him effortlessly. "Wrapped you in his gifts, made you his champion. Tell me, do you feel strong?" Dracovian clawed at Alucard's arm, augmented fingers that could bend steel, leaving no mark at all. "Khorne will consume you." "No." Alucard's eyes burned crimson behind his glasses. "He won't, because I am what your god aspires to be, an eternal engine of violence that answers to nothing and no one. I killed when Khorne was just an echo in the warp. I'll be killing long after his reign ends." He squeezed, and Dracovian's blessed armor crumpled like parchment. The cultist leader's eyes widened as he felt the demon abandoning him, fleeing back into the warp rather than face whatever dwelled within Alucard. "Wait!" Dracovian gasped, suddenly just a frightened man again. "Please! I was a soldier once, loyal to the Emperor. They abandoned us. We had no choice." Alucard's expression softened into something that might have been pity. "I know," he said quietly. "I was a soldier too once. I defended my homeland against impossible odds. Watched my men die for a cause that didn't care about them." His grip tightened. "But I never pretended my damnation was righteous. That's the difference between us, little soldier. I own what I am." Dracovian's neck snapped with a sound like a dry branch breaking. The surviving cultists, barely 20 now, broke and ran. Alucard let them go. They'd spread the word. Tell others what happened when you tried to recruit the monster in red. He stood amid the carnage, surrounded by 70 corpses arranged in patterns his subconscious had dictated. The blood formed streams that flowed into geometric shapes, a message in a language that predated language, written by something that had forgotten how to be human but still remembered beauty. Then he felt it. The attention from beyond the warp's veil. Not just Khorne now, but all of them, watching with varying degrees of interest. Khorne, measuring, evaluating, still considering whether this creature could serve. Slaanesh, intrigued by the artistry, the aesthetic perfection of controlled violence. Tzeentch, frustrated, unable to predict or manipulate something that existed in quantum uncertainty. Nurgle, amused, finding humor in something that couldn't die, discovering a universe where death had lost meaning. Alucard smiled up at the hive ceiling, at the reality membrane beyond where gods and demons pressed close. "Not interested," he called to the void. "I've been offered godhood before. Immortality, power, all the usual temptations." He lit another cigarette, letting smoke curl through the charnel air. "What you don't understand is that I don't want power. I want someone strong enough to take it from me." The warp churned, incomprehension and interest warring in equal measure. "Keep watching," Alucard continued. "Maybe one of you will learn something." The Severan uprising had consumed 3 sectors of Hive Mortis within a week. Former Imperial Guard regiments, disgusted by decades of bureaucratic incompetence and casual sacrifice, had turned against their masters. They called themselves the Free Companies, soldiers who remembered when the Imperium's ideals meant something beyond blind obedience to a corpse on a distant throne. Their leader, Colonel Marius Severan, had served for 40 years before his breaking point. He'd watched good soldiers die because administratum delays left them without ammunition. He'd seen commanders execute entire squads for tactical retreats that saved thousands of lives. He'd read reports of forge worlds producing parade banners while frontline troops lacked basic medical supplies. So he rebelled, and 30,000 soldiers followed him. The Imperium's response was predictable: crush the uprising with overwhelming force, execute the survivors, purge any records that might inspire others. Lord General Kovac assembled a strike force, 10,000 Cadian shock troops, 3 armored regiments, artillery batteries, and air support. And Inquisitor Valeska suggested adding 1 more asset to the assault. Alucard stood in the command chimera as it rumbled toward the Severan stronghold, surrounded by officers who radiated suspicion and poorly concealed fear. He'd insisted on the archaic transport rather than teleportation or drop pod insertion, claiming he wanted to appreciate the journey. In truth, he was studying these soldiers, their equipment, their discipline, the way they prepared for battle. "You will engage hostile forces at coordinates Sigma 7, Colonel Herrick briefed, his voice clipped and professional despite the unease radiating from him. "Severan has fortified the Factorum district. Standard suppression tactics have failed. Your objective is to eliminate resistance and create an opening for our main force." "Eliminate," Alucard repeated, tasting the word. "A clinical way to describe slaughter. I appreciate the honesty, at least." He leaned back against the Chimera's hull. "Tell me, Colonel, do you believe Severan is wrong?" Herrick's jaw tightened. "My beliefs are irrelevant. The Imperium has given its judgment." "That's not what I asked." Silence filled the transport compartment. The other officers found sudden fascination with their data slates. Finally, Herrick met Alucard's eyes behind those orange-tinted glasses. "Severan is a traitor," he said carefully. "He broke his oaths. Whatever his grievances, rebellion cannot be tolerated. Because if soldiers start questioning orders, the whole system collapses." Alucard mused. "I served under similar logic once. The nobles commanded, the soldiers obeyed, and anyone who asked why found themselves impaled outside the castle walls." He smiled. "I was quite good at that part, as it happens." The Chimera shuddered to a halt. Harak practically threw himself toward the exit ramp, desperate to escape the conversation. 5 minutes to contact," he announced. "The creature deploys alone. All units maintain firing distance." Alucard stepped out into the Severan defensive perimeter. The Free Companies had transformed the Factorum district into a fortress. Barricades constructed from industrial equipment created killing fields. Heavy stubbers mounted at strategic points covered every approach. Somewhere in the distance, artillery pieces awaited firing solutions. This wasn't rabble. These were professional soldiers applying decades of experience toward genuine military engineering. Alucard walked forward alone, hands in his pockets, whistling that same centuries-old waltz. The first shot came from 600 meters, a sniper round that should have removed his head. Instead, it passed through shadow where his skull had been a microsecond earlier. He didn't break stride. "Halt!" A voice boomed from speakers mounted on the barricades. "Identify yourself or we open fire!" "I am a monster," Alucard called back cheerfully. "Sent by other monsters to kill you for daring to question your monstrous masters. It's really quite poetic when you think about it." A moment of confused silence. Then someone gave an order, and the world became fire. Heavy stubbers opened up, tracers painting lines of light through the smog-choked air. Autocannons added their deeper voice, high explosive rounds detonating where Alucard walked. A demolisher cannon from a fortified position roared, sending a shell that could crack fortress walls screaming toward him. The smoke cleared. Alucard stood untouched, examining his fingernails. "I understand why you rebelled," he said, voice somehow carrying over the weapon's fire. "The Imperium is a machine that devours its own. It asks for blood and sacrifice while the ones giving orders hide behind walls and doctrines." He began walking forward again, bullets passing through him like he was smoke. "But you made a mistake, little soldiers. You forgot that even justified rebellion still ends in death." A squad broke cover, charging with bayonets fixed. Veterans trying to close to melee where solid munitions might work. Alucard met them halfway. What happened next was almost gentle by his standards. He moved through them like a surgeon, each touch precisely placed. A hand against a throat. Collapse. Palm strike to the chest. Heart stopped. The soldier with the flamer died before he could pull the trigger, and Alucard caught the falling weapon, examined it with mild interest, then tossed it aside. "You have courage," he told the dying squad. "More than those sending me. Remember that, if your Emperor grants you any afterlife at all." The defensive line erupted into coordinated chaos. Free Company officers adjusted tactics, calling in reserves, repositioning heavy weapons. They'd fought orcs, traitor legions, even Necrons during their decades of service. They knew how to kill, but they'd never fought anything like Alucard. He released a measure of his power, just a fraction, but enough. Shadows erupted from his form, dozens of them, each taking vaguely humanoid shape. The familiars he could summon, echoes of lives he'd consumed, given brief substance to serve his will. They poured through the defensive lines like a flood of darkness. Soldiers fired desperately into the swarm, bolts and bullets passing through insubstantial forms. When the shadows touched flesh, men died. Not torn apart or burned, but simply stopped, as if something vital had been drained away. Alucard walked through the carnage toward the Factorum's command center, where Severin had established his headquarters. Behind him, the Free Company's defensive perimeter collapsed. The Imperial force would advance now, crushing what remained, executing survivors. He found Severin in the command sanctum, surrounded by his inner circle, officers who'd followed him into damnation, knowing full well what rebellion meant. They had weapons raised, firing discipline holding despite the nightmare approaching. "Colonel Severin," Alucard said, his familiars dissipating into mist. "I believe the Imperium sent me to make an example of you." Severin was gray-haired, scarred, eyes still sharp despite his age. He held a plasma pistol steady, despite watching his fortress fall. "Then get on with it, monster. My men deserve better than this theatrical nonsense." Alucard studied him with genuine interest. "You're not pleading, not trying to justify yourself, just accepting it." "I knew the cost when I gave the order to rebel," Severin said. 40 years I served. Watched the Imperium waste lives like they were ammunition. Saw commanders sacrifice entire regiments for pride, for politics, for nothing at all." His jaw clenched. "We weren't traitors. We were soldiers who remembered what we were supposed to be protecting." "And what was that?" "Humanity," Severin spat. "Not the Imperium's grinding machinery. Not the Administratum's quotas. Not the High Lord's political games. The actual people we were supposed to defend. He gestured toward the walls. Every man in my command volunteered. They knew we'd die, but at least we'd die standing for something real. Alucard felt something stir, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. Not quite respect, but recognition. This man reminded him of someone. Several someones, actually. Integra Hellsing, giving orders she knew might doom them all. Pip Bernadotte, leading his mercenaries against vampire hordes. Even the Major, in his own twisted way, choosing damnation for a principle. You're right, Alucard said quietly. The Imperium has forgotten what it fights for. It grinds up humanity to preserve itself, calls suffering sacred, mistakes cruelty for strength. He drew one of his castle pistols, a massive weapon that would break a normal human's wrist. But you're also naive. Your rebellion won't change anything. They'll execute you, purge the records, and everything continues exactly as before. I know, Severin said. But at least we tried. Alucard lowered his pistol. No, he said. Confusion rippled through the command sanctum. Severin's officers exchanged glances, weapons wavering. I was sent to kill you, Alucard continued, holstering his casole. To be the Imperium's convenient monster, solving their problem with overwhelming violence. But I've spent 400 years being other people's weapon, and I'm finding the role tiresome in this universe. He turned toward the entrance, where Imperial forces would be advancing. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell Inquisitor Valeska that you fought well but escaped through underground tunnels. Your fortress fell, but you and your command staff vanished into the Underhive's depths. Why? Severin demanded. What do you gain? Alucard glanced back, and his smile was terrible and beautiful. The chance to annoy both sides, to be unpredictable in a universe that's forgotten how. And perhaps because you remind me of someone who once commanded a monster and treated him like he was still worth something. He paused at the doorway. Disappear, Colonel. Take your people deep into the hive. Survive. Be a thorn in the Imperium's side, or fade into obscurity. I don't particularly care which. But don't waste this reprieve dying pointlessly for pride. The Imperium will know you let us go, one of Severin's captains said. Let them, Alucard replied. I'm beginning to think the most interesting thing I can do in this universe is refuse to play by anyone's rules. Not the Imperium's, not Chaos's, not even my own. He dissolved into shadow, leaving the Free Company command staff staring at empty air. Outside, Colonel Herrick found only corpses and a note written in blood on the command center wall. They died well, more than your Imperium deserved. A. The Blood Angels arrived on Hive Mortis 3 weeks after the Severin incident. They came in response to reports of an unknown entity exhibiting vampiric characteristics that had slaughtered hundreds while demonstrating immunity to conventional weaponry. To the Blood Angels, noble sons of Sanguinius who struggled eternally against their own curse of bloodlust, such descriptions triggered immediate alarm protocols. Brother Captain Dante Leonidas commanded the strike force. 2 tactical squads, 1 assault squad, and a Furioso dreadnought containing the ancient brother Mordecai, who'd fought in the Horus heresy itself. They descended from their strike cruiser in drop pods that screamed through Hive Mortis's atmosphere like falling stars, slamming into the Factorum district where Alucard had last been sighted. The Space Marines emerged in perfect formation, ceramite power armor gleaming crimson and gold, bolt pistols and chainswords ready, every movement speaking of centuries of tactical doctrine and genetic enhancement. They were 9 feet of transhuman perfection, each worth 1,000 mortal soldiers, bearing the gene seed of a Primarch who'd been the most beloved of the Emperor's sons. They found Alucard sitting atop a destroyed Lehman Russ battle tank, reading a book he'd scavenged from somewhere in the Hive's depths. He glanced up as the dreadnought's massive form stomped into view, hydraulics hissing, assault cannons tracking. "Space Marines," Alucard observed, marking his page with a scrap of parchment. "I was wondering when I'd encounter the Imperium's angels. Tell me, do you actually believe you're holy warriors? Or is that just excellent branding?" Leonidas stepped forward, mag-locked bolter held ready but not aimed. His helmet's optical lenses glowed with targeting data, analyzing threat parameters. What they showed made no sense. Life signs, negative. Warp corruption, negative. Physical mass, variable. Threat assessment, extreme. "I am Brother Captain Dante Leonidas of the Blood Angels, 3rd Company," he announced, his vox-amplified voice carrying absolute authority. "You are suspected of Xenos infiltration, demonic possession, or heretic experimentation. In the name of the Emperor, identify yourself." Alucard closed his book, some pre-imperial text about philosophy, centuries outdated, and stood. Even at his full height, he was shorter than the towering Space Marines, but somehow his presence made the comparison irrelevant. "I am Alucard," he said simply, "and I'm none of those things. I'm something your Imperium has no classification for. A vampire from a time when such creatures were myths even on Holy Terra." "Impossible," Brother Sergeant Raphael interjected. "Vampires are superstition. Gene curse variations or chaos corruption masquerading as... I drank the blood of virgins in the Carpathian Mountains while your Emperor was still planning his conquest of Terra," Alucard interrupted. "I've been dead for over 400 years, and I'm still more alive than most things in this universe. Believe what you want. Reality doesn't require your approval." Leonidas's hand clenched on his bolter. Through his enhanced senses, he could smell something wrong about this creature. Not the rot of Nurgle or the musk of demonic presence. Something older, colder, like a tomb sealed before the age of strife. "You have killed Imperial citizens," Leonidas stated. "Hundreds of them." "Criminals and cultists," Alucard corrected. "People your Imperium would have executed anyway, just with less artistry. I did your work for you." "That is not your judgment to make." Leonidas's voice hardened. "You are not Imperial. You serve no sanctioned authority. You are an aberration that must be contained or eliminated." Alucard's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Contained? I've heard that before. It never works." He tilted his head, studying the Space Marines with sudden intensity. "But you're interesting. Enhanced humans. Transhuman warriors bearing genetic legacies from your Emperor's sons. Tell me, do you dream of him? Your Primarch? Sanguinius?" Every blood angel stiffened. Leonidas's bolter rose fractionally. "How do you know that name?" he demanded. "Because I can smell it on you," Alucard said, tapping his nose. "The gene seed. The modification. But there's something else, isn't there? A flaw. A curse that runs through your bloodline, making you prone to..." He inhaled deeply. "Rage. Uncontrollable, ecstatic violence. You call it the Black Rage, don't you? The madness that makes you believe you're your Primarch dying aboard Horus's battle barge." Brother Mordecai's dreadnought speakers crackled to life, the ancient warrior's voice like grinding stone. "You speak of sacred mysteries, creature. Knowledge forbidden to outsiders." "I speak of what I observe," Alucard countered. "Your vampires in denial. Enhanced warriors who struggle against bloodlust, who sometimes succumb to berserker fury they can't control. You've built an entire mythology around nobility and sacrifice to avoid admitting what you really are. Monsters who've convinced themselves they serve heaven." "Enough!" Raphael roared, his chainsword roaring to life. "You profane our chapter's honor with your..." He lunged, superhuman speed carrying him across 15 meters in a heartbeat. The chainsword descended toward Alucard's neck with enough force to bisect a tank. Alucard caught the blade in his bare hand, The Chainsword's teeth screamed against his palm, tearing at flesh that regenerated faster than it could be damaged. Raphael's transhuman strength, augmented by centuries of training and power armor servos, pushed downward with tons of force. Alucard didn't move, didn't even strain. "I've fought super soldiers before," he said conversationally over the Chainsword's roar. "The Major's Millennium organization created them. Vampires, werewolves, things that made your genetic modifications look primitive. They died screaming." He pushed, and Raphael flew backward, slamming into the rusted Factorum wall with enough force to leave a crater. The Space Marine's armor systems blared damage warnings. Leonidas opened fire. Bolt rounds exploded against Alucard's position, mass reactive shells detonating with enough force to shred infantry squads. The tactical squads added their fire, dozens of bolters thundering in unison, turning the area into a firestorm of explosive munitions. The smoke cleared. Alucard stood untouched, shadows writhing around him like living things. "Is that it?" he asked, disappointed. "The Emperor's finest warriors, and you rely on the same tactics as every other soldier? I expected better from Space Marines." Brother Mordecai's assault cannon spun up, unleashing a storm of heavy-caliber rounds. Alucard became shadow, the bullets passing harmlessly through insubstantial darkness. He reformed behind the dreadnought, examining its armored sarcophagus with interest. "Fascinating," he murmured. "You entomb your warriors in these walking coffins, keeping them alive for centuries beyond their natural span. I wonder, does the one inside still dream? Does he remember what it was like to have flesh?" "I remember everything!" Mordecai's ancient voice thundered. The dreadnought spun with surprising speed, power fist crackling with energy fields designed to tear through tank armor. Alucard didn't dodge. The power fist connected with his chest, and reality screamed. For 3 seconds, they stood locked. Dreadnought fist pressed against vampire, energy fields tearing at matter that refused to stay damaged. Then Alucard reached up and grasped the power fist with both hands. "You fought in the Horus Heresy," he said, reading something in the dreadnought's reactor signatures. "You've seen the Imperium's brightest moment and its darkest betrayal. 10,000 years you've served, watching everything your Emperor built slowly rot from within." He pulled, and the power fist's mechanisms shrieked, not breaking. Alucard wasn't trying to destroy it, but straining against force that shouldn't exist. "Tell me, Ancient One," Alucard continued, his voice soft enough that only Mordecai's sensors could detect it. "Was it worth it? All those centuries of war, all that sacrifice, did it save humanity or just preserve its slow extinction?" "We endure!" Mordecai roared, his other weapon, a heavy flamer, rotating into position. "That's not an answer!" Promethium ignited, a column of flame hot enough to melt ceramite washing over Alucard. The vampire's form burned, skin blackening, coat catching fire. For a moment, it seemed the Space Marines had found something that worked. Then Alucard laughed. The flames guttered and died as shadows consumed them. Alucard's burned flesh regenerated in seconds, coat reconstituting as if it had never burned. He released Mordecai's power fist and stepped back, brushing ash from his shoulders. "Fire," he said. "Of course you'd try fire. Everyone tries fire eventually. It never works." He looked around at the assembled Space Marines. All weapons now trained on him. "Let me demonstrate what I actually am." He removed his glove, first the right, then the left, revealing pale hands marked with strange symbols. Then he reached up and removed his glasses, tucking them carefully into a coat pocket. "Control Art Restriction System, Level 1, he announced to the confused Space Marines. "Releasing control to Situation A. Hold until target is completely silenced." The shadows exploded outward. What emerged wasn't the man-shaped thing they'd been fighting. This was Alucard's true form, or at least a fraction of it. A pillar of writhing darkness punctuated by hundreds of eyes, each one belonging to someone he'd killed and consumed. Arms emerged from the mass, some human, some not. Mouths opened in the darkness, screaming, laughing, weeping in languages that predated the Imperium. The Space Marines opened fire with everything they had. Bolters, flamers, plasma weapons, Mordecai's assault cannons, all of it poured into the shadow form without effect. The rounds simply passed through, or were absorbed, or struck something that regenerated faster than they could damage it. "We fought your Primarch's enemies!" Leonidas shouted over the weapon's fire, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "We have faced demon princes and Xeno's horrors! You are just another abomination to be purged!" "No!" Alucard's voice emanated from everywhere and nowhere, distorted by the chorus of consumed souls. "I am a very specific abomination. One that's been searching for 400 years for someone capable of killing me. Are you that someone, little angels?" A dozen shadow arms reached out, each one moving with impossible speed. Space Marines were lifted, armor servos straining as they were pulled toward the central mass. Leonidas felt something cold wrap around his ankle, strong as a titan's grip, dragging him forward. Then, from within the mass, Alucard's voice, quieter now, almost thoughtful. "But you're not, are you? You're powerful, yes, enhanced beyond human limits, but you're still just soldiers following orders, fighting because your genetics and indoctrination demand it." The shadow form began contracting. "There's no worthy opponent here, no true challenge. Just more violence in a universe that's forgotten any alternative." The shadows retreated, coalescing back into Alucard's humanoid form. He stood amid the Space Marines, looking suddenly tired despite his immortality. "I'm not your enemy," he said quietly, replacing his glasses. "I'm not anyone's enemy, really. I'm just tired. Tired of killing without purpose. Tired of searching for something this universe might not contain." Leonidas struggled to his feet, armor systems reporting damage but still functional. "Then what do you want?" Alucard smiled, sad and ancient. "I want to die. Truly die. At the hands of someone worthy. A human who's remained human despite everything. Your Imperium doesn't create such people anymore. It creates fanatics, monsters, or corpses. Nothing in between." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your chapter's curse. The Black Rage," he said over his shoulder. "It's not a flaw. It's humanity trying to survive in bodies designed for war. The rage is the gene seed failing to completely suppress your humanity. Hold on to that, angels. It might be the only real thing left in you." And then he was gone, dissolved into shadows that faded into the Underhive's perpetual darkness. The Blood Angels stood in silence, weapons still raised, targeting systems tracking nothing. "Should we pursue?" Raphael asked. Leonidas stared at where Alucard had vanished, thinking about the creature's words, about the Black Rage, about what it meant to be transhuman in an empire that had forgotten what humanity was supposed to mean. "No," he said finally. "Report this to Chapter Command, and pray to the Emperor that thing never finds what it's looking for. The warp should not have been able to touch him. Alucard's quantum state, his existence as both observer and observed, everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, was fundamentally incompatible with the Immaterium's physics. The warp operated on belief and emotion. Alucard existed in a state of Schrodinger's paradox. They were like oil and water, unable to truly mix. But the warp had been trying to understand him for weeks now. And the warp, fed by the psychic screams of quadrillions across the galaxy, was nothing if not persistent. It happened while Alucard walked through the deep Underhive, past levels so ancient they predated the Imperium's colonization. He'd been searching for something. Not prey, not answers, just something different. The endless repetition of violence and suffering had become monotonous. Even immortality couldn't make tedium interesting. The air shimmered. Reality thinned. Alucard felt the dimensional membrane tear and had perhaps 3 seconds to decide whether to resist or accept. Curiosity, that old familiar vice, made the choice for him. The warp swallowed him whole. Transitioning into the Imperium was like being turned inside out while simultaneously existing in every moment of history. Colors that had no names screamed past geometric impossibilities. Time became a suggestion. Up and down held hands and danced off a cliff together. For most humans, even psychers, entering the warp unprotected meant instant madness and demon possession. The human mind couldn't process the fundamental wrongness, the way physics and sanity became optional. Alucard stood in the screaming chaos and laughed. "Finally," he said to the infinite madness surrounding him. "Something actually interesting." The warp recoiled, then pressed closer, trying to understand this thing that shouldn't exist in its realm. Demons coalesced from the psychic turbulence, first dozens, then hundreds, drawn by curiosity and hunger in equal measure. They came in every form chaos could imagine. Bloodletters with brass skin and hell-forged blades, plague-bearers weeping toxic joy, demonettes promising exquisite agonies, horrors splitting and reforming in fractal madness. Lesser demons, greater demons, things that defied classification altogether. They surrounded Alucard in a sphere of impossible geometry, studying this mortal but not mortal thing that had entered their domain. "Interesting," a bloodletter hissed, its voice like grinding metal. "Flesh that does not fear, blood that remembers ancient wars. Horn would find sport in you." "Delicious," a demonette purred, circling on too many legs. "Such exquisite pain in your existence. Immortal and yearning for death. Slaanesh could make that last eternally." "Contradictory," a horror giggled, splitting into pink and blue versions. "Dead but alive, one but many. Tzeentch cannot read your futures because you exist in all of them simultaneously." "Inevitable," a plague-bearer wheezed with paternal affection. "All things decay. Even you, eventually. Grandfather Nurgle is patient." Alucard removed his glasses, eyes burning crimson in the warp's non-light. "You want to know what I am? Let me show you." He released Level 0. In the material realm, this meant unleashing his army of absorbed souls, 3 million victims given temporary form. But here, in the warp where thought and reality were the same thing, it meant something else entirely. The souls exploded outward not as individuals, but as a singular tide of memory and death. Every person Alucard had killed over 4 centuries manifested simultaneously, not as demons or warp entities, but as echoes, imprints of lives ended and consumed. They carried with them every emotion they'd felt at death: fear, rage, acceptance, defiance, despair. The warp, which fed on emotion, suddenly found itself drowning in concentrated mortality. The demon horde recoiled. These weren't souls they could corrupt or consume. They were already claimed, locked within Alucard's existence, neither fully alive nor truly dead. They were paradoxes, and the warp hated paradoxes almost as much as it craved them. "I am 3,424,867 deaths walking," Alucard announced, his voice echoing from every soul echo. "I am the sum total of every life I've ended, carrying them with me eternally. You feast on mortal emotions? Taste this." The soul army surged forward. What followed was the closest thing to a war the warp had experienced from a single entity. Alucard's souls, memories given teeth, tore into the demon horde with the accumulated fury of centuries. They couldn't truly kill demons, not permanently, but they could hurt them, could force them to expend energy reforming, could make the warp itself recoil from the concentrated essence of mortality. A bloodthirster, massive greater demon of Khorne, manifested to restore order. its brass armor gleaming with reflected screams. It stood 3 stories tall, wings spread wide, axe crackling with demonic power. "Enough!" it bellowed. "You are one! We are Legion!" Alucard's form coalesced before it, tall and terrible, eyes like dying suns. "I am Legion. Every soul I've consumed fights with me. Every death I've dealt strengthens me. I'm what happens when a monster becomes a grave that walks." The bloodthirster swung its axe, the blade carving through reality itself. Alucard didn't dodge. He ceased to exist at the moment of impact, then reformed behind the demon, hand pressed against its brass spine. "You're immortal in this realm," Alucard observed. "Unkillable by conventional means. Banished, perhaps, but never truly destroyed." His fingers dug into impossible metal. How frustrating. "We have so much in common." He pulled, and something came free. Not physical matter, but essence, a piece of the bloodthirster's fundamental being. The greater demon shrieked as Alucard absorbed it, adding its power to his own collection. The warp itself paused. Entities didn't consume demons. That wasn't how the Imperium worked. Demons were emotion given form. You couldn't just eat them. Except Alucard apparently could. "Fascinating," he murmured, examining the demon essence now swirling among his other souls. "You're not quite alive, not quite dead. Sustained by belief and emotion, given form by the psychic weight of mortal suffering. In another universe, I might have found that poetic." The demon horde retreated. Not in fear. Demons didn't really experience fear, but in confusion. This thing shouldn't exist in their realm. It violated fundamental principles, and now it was consuming their essence like some kind of metaphysical predator. Then the warp shifted. Colors became teeth. Geometry became hunger. The 4, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, turned their attention directly to this anomaly in their domain. Not manifestations or demons or avatars. The actual gods themselves, pressed close to observe. Alucard felt their presence like pressure against his quantum state. 4 different flavors of divinity, each trying to understand, categorize, control, or destroy him. Khorne pressed forward, and the warp became an ocean of blood. You would make a magnificent champion. Eternal war. Infinite slaughter. Skulls beyond counting. "I've already had infinite slaughter," Alucard replied, somehow holding a conversation with a god while simultaneously fighting its demon legions. "It's tedious after the first few centuries." Slaanesh slithered close, and sensations that had no names caressed Alucard's existence. "But the artistry of it all, the perfection of violence as aesthetic. We could teach you sensations that would make death itself weep with ecstasy." "I've felt everything there is to feel," Alucard said, destroying another wave of demonettes with casual gestures. "Pain, pleasure, rage, joy. It all becomes noise eventually. You're just offering me louder noise." Nurgle chuckled, and the sound was like civilizations rotting. "Ah, but you misunderstand entropy, little Deathwalker. Everything decays. Even you. Even your quantum immortality. Join me, and find peace in inevitable decline." "I've been decaying for 400 years, Alucard countered. "I started as a man, became a monster, and now I'm something neither alive nor dead. Your decay is just another prison." Tzeentch manifested as impossible angles and futures that contradicted themselves. "Curious. You exist in all possible states. Schrödinger's vampire. I cannot predict you because you are prediction made flesh. Such a perfect paradox deserves preservation." "I don't want preservation," Alucard said, and for the first time, genuine emotion crept into his voice. "I want ending. True, final, permanent death. Can any of you offer that?" Silence rippled through the warp. The four considered. No, they answered in terrible unison. We are eternal. Our servants are eternal. What we touch becomes eternal. We cannot grant death to something that has transcended it. Alucard stood amid the warp's chaos, surrounded by demon armies and the attention of dark gods, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Disappointment. Then we have nothing to discuss, he said quietly. He began walking. Not toward any destination. Destinations didn't exist in the warp, but with intention. The quantum nature of his existence asserted itself against the Imperium's physics. He was here and not here, observing and observed, a walking contradiction that the warp couldn't fully grasp. The demons tried to stop him. Waves of them, thousands strong, throwing themselves at this impossible prey. Alucard walked through them like they were mist, his soul army creating a perimeter of mortality that the warp's inhabitants couldn't penetrate. You cannot leave, the four declared. We have not given permission. I don't need your permission, Alucard replied. I exist in a quantum state. I'm already in your realm and outside it simultaneously. You never really captured me. You just convinced me to pay attention. He focused, finding the thread of his own existence that stretched back to the material realm. The connection was thin, strained by the warp's interference, but it held. He'd existed in multiple states simultaneously for 30 years. The warp was just another layer of reality to his perception. Wait, Tzeentch called. You interest us. Return. We would learn more. Then learn this, Alucard said, pausing at the threshold between realms. You're gods, yes, ancient and powerful, but you're also young, born from humanity's emotions in the last 40,000 years. Given form by collective psychosis. I've killed an actual god, one who existed independent of worship, who commanded reality through pure will. He smiled into the screaming chaos. If I find a way to truly die, I'm taking you with me. Consider that a promise. And then he stepped, quantum state collapsing and re-expanding in the material realm. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, and Alucard stumbled into an abandoned factorum level, temporarily solid, momentarily exhausted. Behind him, the warp churned with confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been the divine equivalent of concern. In the depths of the Imperium, four gods considered what they'd encountered. A mortal that had entered their realm and left by choice. An entity that had consumed demon essence and remained uncorrupted. A paradox that existed in defiance of their fundamental nature. That one will be trouble, Khorne rumbled. Or entertainment, Slaanesh countered. Or both, Nurgle laughed. Indeed, Tzeentch agreed. And we shall watch his thread with interest. Alucard sat in the darkness of the factorum, smoking a cigarette that had somehow survived his warp transit, and considered what he'd learned. The Chaos Gods were powerful, but limited. They couldn't grant true death. They were parasites feeding on the galaxy's collective suffering, grown fat on 10,000 years of endless war. Which meant if this universe contained something capable of killing him, it wouldn't be found in the warp. It would be found on Terra, at the heart of the Imperium itself, where a corpse god sat on a golden throne, sustained by 1,000 psyker sacrifices per day, holding the entire human empire together through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Alucard stood, adjusted his coat, and began walking. It was time to meet the God Emperor of mankind. Getting to Terra proved remarkably easy for something that technically didn't obey conventional physics. Alucard traveled as a stowaway aboard an Adeptus Ministorum pilgrimage vessel, the Eternal Devotion, one of thousands that carried faithful masses to humanity's throne world every year. He existed in the ship's shadows, in the spaces between decks, a quantum ghost, observing the zealous pilgrims who'd saved for lifetimes to glimpse Holy Terra. The journey took 6 months through the warp, and Alucard spent it watching. He watched as pilgrims prayed 18 hours per day, flagellating themselves for the privilege of approaching the Emperor's light. He watched them starve because rations were luxuries unworthy of the faithful. He watched 300 die from preventable diseases because the ship's medici facilities were reserved for crew. Their bodies were rendered into corpse starch and fed to the survivors, who consumed it gratefully as communion with martyrs. By the time the eternal devotion entered Terra's orbit, Alucard had witnessed more casual cruelty in the name of faith than he'd seen during the entire Inquisition's witch hunts of his original era. The Major would have loved this, he muttered to shadows that couldn't answer. An entire species weaponizing its own suffering. It's almost beautiful in its dedication to misery. Terra hung in the void like a jewel wrapped in adamantium. The throne world, cradle of humanity, most sacred planet in the Imperium. But where ancient records spoke of blue oceans and green continents, Alucard saw only endless cityscape. The entire planet had been transformed into one colossal hive, architecture piled upon architecture for 40,000 years. Original land masses buried kilometers beneath administrative districts and cathedral factories. The Astronomicon blazed from the planet's core, humanity's lighthouse in the warp, powered by the God Emperor's will and 1,000 psyker sacrifices per day. To Alucard's quantum-shifted senses, it looked like a wound in reality, a torch fueled by screaming souls. So that's what divinity looks like in this universe, he murmured. Consumption dressed as salvation. Infiltrating the Imperial Palace proved only slightly more challenging than boarding the ship. The palace sprawled across the Himalayan mountains, or what had been mountains before they were buried under fortifications that made medieval castles look like children's toys. Walls kilometers high, void shields that could withstand orbital bombardment. Custodian Guard, the Emperor's personal warriors, each worth 100 space marines, patrolling every approach. Alucard walked through it all like smoke. His quantum state let him exist in superposition, here and not here, observed and unobserved. Security systems registered contradictory data. Custodians felt something pass, but could never quite focus on what. Servitor scanners reported 0 intrusions and massive intrusions simultaneously, creating feedback loops that tech priests would spend weeks trying to debug. He descended through the palace's layers, past the Sanctum Imperialis, where the High Lords ruled in the Emperor's name, past the Hall of Victories, celebrating crusades that had drowned sectors in blood, past shrines built from the bones of martyrs, museums displaying artifacts from humanity's golden age, chambers where administratum scribes recorded deaths in ledgers that stretched for kilometers. Everything spoke of an empire built on suffering, sustained by sacrifice, justified by survival. Alucard found it familiar, reminded him of Wallachia during the Turkish Wars, a civilization so traumatized by endless conflict that cruelty became reflex and compassion became treason. He descended deeper. The throne room waited in the palace's heart, buried beneath layers of sanctity and security. Getting closer meant passing through progressively more sacred spaces, each more heavily guarded than the last. The Adeptus Custodes noticed him first. These were not space marines. Those were mass-produced warrior monks, genetically enhanced but still fundamentally human. The custodians were art, each one individually crafted by the Emperor himself, closer to Primarchs than regular Astartes. They stood 3 meters tall in their golden auramite armor, guardian spears crackling with barely contained power. Captain General Valoris, Supreme Commander of the Custodian Guard, stood before the final gate, barring Alucard's path. His armor bore 10,000 years of battle honors. His eyes held the weight of eternal vigilance. "That is far enough, anomaly," Valoris said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You have infiltrated the Emperor's palace through means we will study and prevent. But you will proceed no further." Alucard stopped, respecting the moment. This was a warrior who'd guarded humanity's god for centuries. Whatever else could be said about the Imperium, its defenders believed. "I need to see him," Alucard said simply. "Your emperor, the one you've spent 10,000 years protecting." "Impossible. The emperor receives only the High Lords and only in dire need. You are—" Valoris paused, his genetically enhanced senses struggling to categorize what stood before him. "Something that should not exist. We cannot permit your presence before the master of mankind." "I've entered your warp and walked out uncorrupted," Alucard replied. "I've fought your space marines to a standstill. I've rejected the Chaos God's offers. And I'm not here to harm your emperor. I'm here because I need to understand what he is. He is divinity incarnate, the salvation of humanity, the anathema to chaos." Valoris's spear lowered into guard position. "And you will not approach him." Alucard studied the custodian, seeing something unexpected. Genuine devotion. Not the mad zealotry of the pilgrims or the conditioned fanaticism of standard troops. This was a warrior who had stood in the Emperor's actual presence, who knew what he guarded and chose to serve anyway. "If I wanted to fight you, Captain General, we'd already be fighting," Alucard said quietly. "I'm asking permission. Let me see your god. Let me understand what's worth this civilization's endless suffering. And if he demands my destruction afterward, I'll accept his judgment." Silence held for 10 heartbeats. Then Valoris did something unprecedented. He stepped aside. "The Emperor's will is beyond my comprehension," he said. "But I feel his guidance, faint as it is after 10,000 years. He permits your audience." The spear remained ready. "But know this, Anomaly. If you threaten him in any way, I will destroy you or die trying." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Alucard replied, walking past the galaxy's greatest guardian toward humanity's god. The throne room was smaller than Alucard expected. After all the grandeur, all the cathedral cities and mountain-sized monuments, the actual chamber containing the god emperor was almost intimate. Circular, perhaps 100 meters across, filled with technology that blended ancient human engineering with arcane mechanisms that predated even the dark age of technology. And at the center, the Golden Throne. It was less a throne than a life support system built by a species that had forgotten how to die. Cables thick as trees connected to walls honeycombed with processing units. Psychic resonators hummed with barely contained energy. And within the machinery's heart, sustained by 10,000 years of desperate improvisation, sat the Emperor of mankind. Alucard had expected grandeur. Divinity made manifest. A being of light and power that would justify 40,000 years of worship. What he found was a corpse. The Emperor had been beautiful once. Alucard could see it beneath the decay. Impossibly tall, proportioned like ancient humanity's idealized sculptures, bearing features that combined every human ethnicity into something transcendent. He wore armor of gold and crimson, masterwork protection that had probably turned aside demon princes and Xeno's horrors. But his flesh was desiccated, skin like ancient parchment stretched over bones too large. His eyes were closed, had been closed for 10,000 years. Life support systems kept him functioning at some minimal level, while psychic machinery channeled his will toward maintaining the Astronomicon, that beacon burning in the warp, guiding humanity's ships through impossible darkness. 1,000 psychers died daily to fuel this, fed into machinery that consumed their souls to keep one being alive. The logistics alone were staggering, a continuous stream of sacrifices, each one a person with hopes and dreams and families rendered into psychic fuel. And it still wasn't enough. The Emperor was failing, slowly, inexorably, despite every resource the Imperium could pour into his preservation. Alucard stood before the Golden Throne for long minutes, studying the Imperium's god with immortal eyes that had seen too much. Then he spoke. "You're not divine," he said quietly. "You're just old. Ancient and powerful, certainly. A psyker beyond anything else this universe has produced. But not a god. Just a man who accumulated so much power that humans forgot you were human." The machinery hummed. Life support systems cycled. The Astronomicon pulsed with its beacon. And something answered. It wasn't words. It was presence. Vast, tired, ancient beyond reckoning. The Emperor's consciousness, spread across 10,000 years of eternal vigil, focused fractionally on the anomaly standing before his throne. Images flooded Alucard's mind. Humanity's birth. Crawling from primordial seas. The first murders. The first wars. Civilizations rising and falling like waves. The Emperor watching, guiding, shaping from the shadows. The age of strife, when psychers manifested and demons walked freely. The unification wars uniting Terra through conquest. The Great Crusade reuniting humanity's scattered worlds. The Horus Heresy, beloved son turned traitor, half the Imperium burning. The final duel aboard Horus's flagship. Sanguinius dying. The Emperor's body breaking. The choice to enter the Golden Throne rather than die. To preserve humanity's light for just a little longer. 10,000 years of watching his dream rot. The Imperium becoming everything he fought against. Superstitious, cruel, stagnant, unable to stop it. Unable to even speak clearly. Only able to maintain the Astronomicon, that one critical function, while everything else fell to corrupt administrators and zealous fanatics who worshipped a god who'd denied divinity. And through it all, the terrible question, was it worth it? Alucard reeled from the psychic contact, steadying himself against machinery that hummed with captured souls. When he recovered, he found himself understanding. "You're trapped," he said. "Not by the throne. You could probably leave if you chose. You're trapped by responsibility. If you die, the Astronomicon fails. If the Astronomicon fails, humanity's interstellar empire collapses. Trillions die. Chaos consumes everything." He laughed, but it was bitter. "You're an immortal who can't afford to seek death. We're opposites. I'm immortal and desperate to die. You're dying and can't afford to." The presence pulsed agreement, tinged with something that might have been amusement. "The Chaos God said they couldn't grant me true death," Alucard continued. "They're parasites, feeding on humanity's suffering. But you're different. Your human will concentrate it to its absolute limit. You've fought demons, banished gods, reshaped reality through pure psychic might." He stepped closer, until he stood directly before the Golden Throne. "Could you do it?" he asked. "Could you kill something that exists in quantum immortality? Something that's simultaneously alive and dead, here and not here? Could the anathema, the being chaos itself fears, grant me the ending I've searched for across 2 universes?" The Emperor's consciousness pressed closer, examining Alucard with a tension that made reality bend. The vampire felt himself seen in ways that went beyond perception. Every soul he'd consumed, every life he'd ended, every moment of his 400-year existence laid bare. Then, slowly, an answer formed. Not words, but understanding. Direct psychic communication that transcended language. No. Alucard felt disappointment crash through him like a wave. You exist in superposition. Your quantum state is fundamental to your being. To kill you, one would need to collapse all your possible states simultaneously, to observe you as dead in every reality at once. Such an act would require... The Emperor paused, vast consciousness considering. Something impossible even for me. You have transcended death so completely that nothing in this universe, not chaos, not the void, not even the Ceton in their full power, could grant you that ending. Then I'm trapped too, Alucard said softly. condemned to wander eternally, searching for something that doesn't exist. Perhaps. Or perhaps you search for the wrong thing. Alucard looked up sharply. What do you mean? You seek death because you believe it will grant meaning to your existence. But meaning is not found in ending. It is found in purpose. The Emperor's presence intensified, and Alucard felt something unexpected. Compassion. I cannot die because my death would doom trillions. You cannot die because your nature transcends mortality. We are both immortals trapped by our own power. But where I have purpose, protecting humanity, however imperfectly, you have only wandered. Are you offering me a purpose? Alucard asked, suspicious. Service to your Imperium? No, I offer you a choice. Images flickered. The Imperium as it was, cruel, stagnant, slowly dying. The Imperium as it could be. Humanity remembering what it fought for beyond mere survival. Change coming slowly, painfully, over centuries. And at the edges, a wild card. An immortal who answered to no one, who could act without the Imperium's crushing orthodoxy. You rejected chaos because they could not grant death. Reject me too, if you wish. But consider, an eternity of purposeless wandering, or an eternity of making this dark universe marginally less terrible. Neither grants you death, but one, perhaps, grants meaning. Alucard stood silent, processing the offer. The Emperor wasn't demanding service or worship. He was suggesting partnership? No, something stranger. Permission. The permission to be a force of chaos, lowercase c, in a universe that had calcified into rigid orthodoxy. You want me to be your wild card, Alucard said slowly. Operating outside the system, disrupting things, forcing change through sheer refusal to play by established rules. I want you to choose your own path. But if that path occasionally intersects with humanity's survival, I will not object. Alucard laughed, genuine and surprised. A god who doesn't demand worship. That's refreshing. He looked around the throne room, at the machinery keeping this ancient being alive, at the Astronomicon burning in the psychic distance. All right, corpse god. I'll accept your non-offer. I'll wander your dark millennium. I'll fight what I choose to fight, help who I choose to help, and generally be as unpredictable as possible, he smiled. Sharp and terrible. And who knows, maybe in a few centuries I'll find something in this universe that can actually challenge me. Or maybe I'll just make things interesting for your Imperium. Either way, eternity won't be boring. That is all I ask. Now go. The custodians grow anxious, and explaining your presence would require conversations I lack the strength for. Alucard turned to leave, then paused. One more question. Do you regret it? All of this? The Imperium, the sacrifices, the 10,000 years of watching your dream become a nightmare. The Emperor's presence was silent for a long moment. Then, every day. But regret changes nothing. Only action matters. Remember that, Wanderer. In the grim darkness of the far future, regret is a luxury no one can afford. Alucard walked from the throne room, past Captain General Valoris, who watched with inscrutable expression, up through the palace's layers and out into Terra's eternal night. He had his answer. No one could kill him. Not chaos, not the Emperor, not the universe itself. But maybe that was all right. Maybe immortality didn't have to mean endless searching for death. Maybe it could mean something else entirely. For 3 months after leaving Terra, Alucard wandered the Imperium like a blood-soaked wind. He had no master now. No Hellsing to command him. No Integra to give orders he'd gleefully subvert while still obeying. The Emperor had given him something stranger than servitude. Permission to exist without purpose, to carve his own path through the 41st millennium's darkness. So Alucard did what he'd always done best. He hunted, not randomly, not indiscriminately, but with a peculiar logic that would have driven any inquisitorial analyst mad trying to predict. He appeared where dogma had calcified into cruelty, where power had become its own justification, where the difference between the Imperium and chaos had blurred into meaninglessness. On Quintus Primus, he found an ecclesiarchy cardinal who'd transformed an entire hive into his personal torture garden, executing heretics by the thousand while accumulating wealth that could have fed the population for decades. Alucard walked into his cathedral fortress during evening mass, interrupted the cardinal's sermon about sacred suffering, and proceeded to demonstrate what genuine suffering looked like. The cardinal's screams echoed for 3 hours before Alucard finally granted him the mercy of death. The wealth was distributed to the starving masses before imperial authorities could lock it away again. On Mordian, he encountered a regiment of Iron Guard whose commander had executed an entire company for cowardice, their crime being a tactical retreat that saved 3,000 civilians from orc marauders. Alucard appeared in the commander's quarters at midnight, explained in excruciating detail exactly how many soldiers throughout history had died for commander's pride, then gave the man a choice: resign and enter self-imposed exile, or Alucard would demonstrate what happened to officers who wasted their soldiers' lives. The commander chose exile. Barely. On Necromunda, he stumbled into a Genestealer cult in its final stages, the Patriarch's psychic call resonating across the hive, summoning the Tyranid fleet that would consume the planet. But instead of alerting Imperial authorities, Alucard did something unexpected. He challenged the Patriarch directly. The fight lasted 6 hours, vampire versus alien Psyker Patriarch, quantum immortality against biological inevitability. The Patriarch was ancient, powerful, sustained by generations of hybrid offspring. It had broken Space Marine strike teams, corrupted entire Imperial Guard regiments, prepared a world for consumption. Alucard tore it apart with his bare hands, absorbed its essence into his collection of souls, and severed the psychic beacon calling the Hive fleet. Then he disappeared before the Arbites could arrive, leaving only a note written in Xenos Ichor: "Your world gets to live. Try to deserve it." But it was on Van Heist Tertius that everything changed. Van Heist Tertius was a forge world dedicated to manufacturing laser guns and basic armor for Imperial Guard regiments across the sector. 12 billion souls toiled in its factories, overseen by tech priests who viewed humans as inferior components in the Omnissiah's grand machine. Alucard had come investigating rumors of something strange. Entire factory shifts vanishing, production quotas mysteriously maintained despite missing workers. Whispers of something in the deep forges that even the Mechanicus feared to approach. He found her in Manufactorum 7, level sub-30. She was young, perhaps 16, though malnutrition made age difficult to determine. Her name was Kira, and she'd worked the Prometheum processing line since she was 8 years old. Her hands bore chemical burns that would never heal properly. Her lungs were scarred from toxic fumes. Her eyes held the hollow exhaustion common to Forge World laborers who knew they'd likely die before seeing their 20th year. But those eyes also held something else: defiance. Alucard had been tracking the disappearances through the Forge's lower levels when he'd stumbled upon her secret. She'd discovered an abandoned section of the Manufactorum, ancient even by Forge World standards, containing functional but mothballed equipment, and she'd been using it. "You're stealing from the Mechanicus," Alucard observed, watching her salvage components from a deactivated assembly line. "That's usually punishable by servitor conversion." Kira spun, homemade laspistol rising with surprising steadiness. Then she saw him, really saw him, and her weapon hand wavered. You're not Mechanicus, not Arbites. What are you?" "A monster," Alucard replied honestly. "But at the moment, a curious one. What are you doing with stolen components?" She could have run. Should have, probably. Instead, she made a choice that surprised even an immortal vampire. "Building something," she said. "Come on. If you're going to turn me in, you might as well see why it'll be worth it." She led him deeper into the abandoned section, through corridors that hadn't seen maintenance in centuries, to a hidden chamber where dozens of forge workers waited. Not a cult. Alucard's senses would have detected chaos corruption. Just people. Exhausted, desperate people who'd found each other in the darkness. And they were building an escape. Not a ship. That would be impossible. But a communications array, cobbled together from stolen components and salvaged tech, capable of sending messages beyond the Forge world's Mechanicus-controlled Vox networks. They'd been broadcasting for months, sending desperate pleas to anyone who might listen. Merchant vessels, rogue traders, even Xenos if they'd offer sanctuary. "We're slaves," Kira explained, showing him schematics drawn in stolen data slate stylus. "The Mechanicus says we're indentured workers, but we're born here, work here, and die here. No choice, no freedom, just production quotas, and the promise that our suffering glorifies the Omnissiah." Her jaw clenched. "I watched my mother die on the line, crushed by machinery because stopping production for rescue would have violated efficiency protocols. The tech priests prayed over her corpse and called it sacred." Alucard studied the makeshift communication array. It was crude but clever, using principles that combined desperation with genuine technical innovation. These weren't educated engineers. They were laborers who'd taught themselves electronics through trial and error, so risking execution with every stolen component. "Has anyone responded?" he asked. "One ship," another worker said. An older man named Thomas, whose augmetic leg marked him as a manufactorum veteran. "A merchant vessel called the Prophet's Edge. They agreed to extract anyone who could reach the orbital docks. But," he gestured helplessly at the group, "we're watched constantly, tagged, monitored. Even getting to the surface would trigger every alarm the Mechanicus has." "So you're trapped," Alucard concluded. "Building an escape you can't use, sending messages that can't save you." "We're trying," Kira snapped. "Which is more than anyone else does. The Imperium says suffering is sacred. The Mechanicus says we're components that can be replaced. Everyone tells us to accept our place and die grateful." Her eyes blazed. "I refuse. I'd rather die trying to escape than spend another year watching friends get crushed in machines while tech priests thank the Omnissiah for maintaining production quotas." Alucard looked at her. Really looked. Saw not a victim, but a fighter. Someone who'd been ground down by a system designed to destroy individuality, and who'd somehow retained enough humanity to resist. She reminded him of someone. Several someones, actually. Integra, refusing to bend to vampire or convention. Saraz, choosing to fight even after becoming a monster. Every human across 4 centuries who'd looked at impossible odds and said no. "I could help you," he said quietly. The chamber went silent. Dozens of desperate eyes focused on him. "Who are you?" Kira demanded. "Someone who's spent 400 years being other people's weapon," Alucard replied. "And who recently decided that might not be enough. Tell me about this merchant ship, the Prophet's Edge. When does it arrive?" 3 days, Thomas said cautiously. "But even if you could get us to the docks—" "The Mechanicus will track you," Alucard interrupted. "Augmetics, identification tattoos, embedded monitoring chips. You're all flagged as Forge property. They'll reclaim you before you reach orbit." "Then it's hopeless," someone whispered. "No," Alucard said, and his smile was terrible and wonderful. "It just requires someone who doesn't care about Imperial law, Mechanicus authority, or the natural order of things. Someone who's already damned and has nothing left to lose." He looked around the chamber. "How many of you want to leave? Actually escape, not just dream about it?" "All of us," Kira said without hesitation. 317 workers in total. We've been planning this for 2 years. 317, Alucard repeated. "That's ambitious. I like ambition." He began walking, examining the chamber, the people, calculating possibilities. "Here's what's going to happen. In 3 days, you're all going to walk to the orbital docks. Not sneak. Walk. During shift change, when the crowds are thickest, and no one will stop you. That's impossible, Thomas protested. The security protocols will be experiencing catastrophic failures across multiple systems, Alucard interrupted. Identification networks will report conflicting data. Surveillance cogitators will crash. Alarm systems will malfunction. The Mechanicus will be too busy managing technical disasters to notice 300 workers going where they shouldn't. Kira stepped forward, searching his face. You can do that? Hack the Mechanicus networks? I can do much worse than that, Alucard replied. But yes, give me access to your communication array. I need to contact your merchant ship and ensure they're ready for, let's call it an aggressive boarding action. He spent the next hour examining their equipment, impressed despite himself. These workers had built something functional from scraps, taught themselves principles that took tech priests decades to learn, all while maintaining their regular grueling shifts. It was resourcefulness born of desperation, the kind of human ingenuity that the Imperium claimed to value but systematically crushed. Finally, he had what he needed. 3 days, he told them. Prepare. Pack only what you absolutely need. When the shift change alarm sounds, you walk. Don't run. Running looks suspicious. Just walk with purpose, like you belong there. By the time you reach the docks, the Prophet's Edge will be waiting, and I'll have ensured no one interferes. Why? Kira asked. Why help us? What do you gain? Alucard considered the question. What did he gain? Not wealth. He had no use for currency. Not power. He was already immortal. Not favor. He'd rejected service to gods and empires alike. Because the Imperium has forgotten what it fights for, he said finally. It grinds up humanity to preserve itself, mistakes suffering for virtue, treats people like ammunition. And I find myself tired of watching that happen without objection. He smiled. Also, the Mechanicus annoys me. They worship machines but have forgotten that humans built those machines. Seems like someone should remind them. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. When you escape, don't try to return. Don't try to reform the system from outside. Just live. Find a world where you can be free. Have families. Build something that isn't dedicated to endless war and production. The best revenge against a system that treats you as expendable is to thrive without it. Kira nodded slowly, something like hope kindling in exhausted eyes. We'll be ready, she promised. Alucard dissolved into shadows, leaving only his voice behind. See that you are. I've spent 4 centuries killing. It would be nice, just once, to save something instead. The Mechanicus of Van Heist Tertius had perfected predictability over 10,000 years. Every shift change occurred with chronometric precision. Every worker movement was tracked and logged. Every deviation from routine triggered investigative protocols. The Forge world operated like a vast machine, and machines were meant to be predictable, which made Alucard's interference all the more catastrophic. It began at 0600 hours, shift change for Manufactorum 7. 317 workers began walking, not running, not sneaking, toward the orbital transit stations. They moved in small groups, spacing themselves naturally, carrying minimal belongings in standard-issue satchels. The first security checkpoint should have stopped them immediately. Worker identification chips were supposed to flag unauthorized movement, triggering servitor alerts and Scutarii response. Instead, the checkpoint's machine spirits threw contradictory error codes. Worker IDs registered as both present at their assigned stations and physically at the checkpoint simultaneously. The paradoxical data caused processing loops that crashed the local cogitator network. By the time tech priests arrived to perform holy rites of troubleshooting, the first groups had already passed through. The second checkpoint experienced similar failures. Then the third. Across Manufactorum 7, security systems reported quantum impossibilities, workers existing in multiple locations, identification tags broadcasting from places they couldn't physically be, surveillance footage showing crowds where sensors detected nothing. Magos Dominus Kraev, overseer of Manufactorum 7, received 1,700 error reports in 45 minutes. His augmetic mind processed the data with machine efficiency and reached a conclusion that sent ice through his organic components. Someone was systematically corrupting the Forge World's sacred machine spirits. He dispatched Skitarii Rangers, cybernetically enhanced soldiers carrying rad carbines and galvanic rifles, to lock down all transit stations. But when they arrived, their targeting systems malfunctioned. Friend or foe identification marked everyone as both authorized and unauthorized. Their weapons' machine spirits refused firing solutions, caught in logic loops that shouldn't have been possible. The workers walked past them unmolested. In the transit stations, Alucard watched from the shadows, his quantum nature interfacing with the Mechanicus networks in ways that made their machine spirits scream. He wasn't hacking in any conventional sense. He was existing in a state that their systems couldn't process, forcing contradictions that cascaded through every connected cogitator. He'd spent 3 days studying the Forge World's networks, learning their protocols, finding their vulnerabilities. The Mechanicus had made their systems redundant and robust against external attack, but they'd never considered something that could exist in superposition, simultaneously attacking from inside and outside their networks, everywhere and nowhere. It was almost too easy, almost disappointing. The first groups reached the orbital docks within 2 hours. The Prophet's Edge, a battered merchant vessel captained by a shrewd woman named Celestia Roth, waited with cargo bays open. Roth had agreed to the extraction for a surprisingly reasonable fee, mostly because she'd spent decades hating the Mechanicus' stranglehold on Forge World labor. "Get them aboard quickly," she voxed to her crew. "I don't care what kind of chaos this mysterious benefactor is causing. It won't last forever." But it lasted long enough. By hour 4, all 317 workers had reached the Prophet's Edge. They packed into cargo holds designed for freight, not people, but no one complained. After years of manufactorum conditions, even improvised transport felt like luxury. Kira was among the last to board, pausing at the airlock to look back at the Forge World that had been her prison. She'd expected to feel satisfaction, maybe triumph. Instead, she felt something more complex. Grief for those left behind, anger at the system that made escape necessary, and fragile hope that maybe, somewhere in the galaxy, she could build something better. "Thank you," she whispered to the shadows, knowing somehow that he could hear. "Whoever you are, whatever you are, thank you." Alucard, still interfacing with the Forge World's networks across 3 kilometers, felt her gratitude like a physical touch. It was strange, unfamiliar. He'd been thanked before, usually by people who didn't realize the cost of his help. But this felt different. This felt like it mattered. The Prophet's Edge began its departure sequence. Alarms finally broke through the network chaos as Mechanicus authorities realized what was happening. Skitarii assault teams mobilized, defense platforms powered up. Magos Kraev himself transmitted emergency protocols to engage and recapture the fleeing ship. And then every single one of those systems experienced catastrophic failure simultaneously. Defense platforms reported targeting solutions, then immediately lost them. Assault ships received launch clearance, then their machine spirits locked their engines. Communication networks transmitted orders that arrived scrambled into binary nonsense. The entire orbital defense grid collapsed into confused chaos, every system fighting against itself. The Prophet's Edge slipped through the confusion and translated into the warp, carrying 317 freed slaves toward whatever future they could build. Alucard withdrew from the networks, letting the chaos collapse in his absence. Alarms blared. Tech priests began the lengthy process of purging and reconsecrating every affected system. It would take them months to fully recover. He manifested in Magos Kraev's sanctum, a chamber filled with humming machinery and brass-plated servitors. The Magos turned, his mechanical eyes focusing with visible effort on the intruder who'd appeared from nowhere. "You!" Kryev's vox-synthesized voice grated. "You corrupted the sacred machine spirits, violated the Omnissiah's gifts, enabled the theft of 317 manufacturing assets." "Assets," Alucard repeated, tasting the word. "You mean people, humans who you work to death for production quotas." "Components of the greater machine," Kryev corrected. "Their suffering serves the Imperium. Their labor maintains forge output. Their worth is measured in productivity," Alucard interrupted. "I know. I've heard it all before, in different words. The Ottomans called my people infidels, whose suffering glorified Allah. Catholic Inquisitors called their victims heretics, whose pain purified the Church. Every tyrant across history has found ways to sanctify cruelty." He stepped closer, and shadows moved with him. "Here's something for you to calculate with your augmented mind, Magos. I'm going to leave now. You will not pursue those workers. You will not alert other Forge worlds or Imperial authorities. You will write this off as a technical malfunction and continue your production quotas with your remaining labor force." "Impossible. The Omnissiah demands nothing," Alucard interrupted, his voice cold as the void. "You worship machines built by ancient humans who'd be horrified by what you've become. You've mistaken tools for gods and efficiency for virtue. And if you continue pursuing those workers, I will return. I will interface with every machine spirit on this world simultaneously. I will make your network scream until every cogitator burns out and every servitor tears itself apart trying to process the contradictions." He leaned close, eyes burning crimson behind orange glasses. "I am quantum uncertainty made flesh, Magos. I exist in states your machine spirits cannot process. I can be your worst nightmare or simply a strange memory, your choice." Kryev's augmetic systems processed threat assessment. Probability of successful resistance, 0.003%. Probability of catastrophic forge-wide system failure, if anomaly carried out threats, 97.4%. Recommended action, strategic compliance. "The workers will be written off as acceptable losses," Kryev said finally. "System malfunctions occur. The Omnissiah tests us through adversity." "Good." Alucard stepped back. "Remember this. When you're tempted to treat your remaining workers as expendable, there are things in this universe that still care about human life, and some of those things are very, very dangerous to annoy." He dissolved into shadow, leaving Magos Kryev alone with 1,700 error reports and the uncomfortable realization that the universe contained variables his calculations couldn't predict. Alucard wandered the underhive of Van Heist Tertius for 3 more days, thinking. For the first time in 400 years, he'd chosen to save rather than destroy. He'd spent centuries perfecting death, becoming its ultimate expression. He'd killed gods and monsters, armies and innocents, anyone who stood before him or gave him permission to slaughter. But helping those workers escape felt different, significant in ways that killing never had. The Emperor had been right. Purpose didn't come from ending, it came from choosing what mattered. And perhaps, just perhaps, in a universe drowning in grimdark inevitability, the most radical act was refusing to let despair have the final word. He thought about Kira and her desperate determination. About the workers who'd risked everything rather than accept their chains. About the Prophet's edge carrying them toward uncertain but chosen futures. And he thought about the Imperium. Vast, cruel, necessary perhaps, but no longer beyond questioning. The Emperor rotted on his throne, unable to fix what his empire had become. The Space Marines fought endless wars for an ideal that had calcified into dogma. The common citizens suffered under systems that valued their pain more than their humanity. But within that darkness, humans still tried, still resisted, still found ways to care about each other despite a civilization built on mandatory cruelty. That was worth something. Maybe worth an immortal's attention. Alucard stood in the deepest section of the Underhive, where even the Mechanicus's influence faded into forgotten tunnels and ancient darkness. He lit a cigarette. His supply was running low. He'd need to figure out how to manufacture pre-imperial tobacco in the 41st millennium, and considered his options. He could continue wandering, appearing wherever his whims took him. Being chaos incarnate in a universe that desperately needed unpredictability, he could seek out genuine threats. Chaos champions, Xenos horrors, things that actually challenged him even if they couldn't kill him. He could keep finding people like Kira, trapped in systems that ground them down, and offer them what no one else would, the chance to escape. Or he could do all of it, become something this universe had never seen, an immortal wild card, answering to no one, serving no cause but his own twisted sense of justice. The immortal that even chaos feared, he murmured, remembering the title from that imperial propaganda pamphlet he'd seen. Some scribe had tried to categorize him, turn him into a cautionary tale or heroic legend. Neither was accurate, but both were interesting. He smiled into the darkness, sharp, genuine, almost happy. "All right, 41st millennium," he said to the uncaring void. "You want a monster? I'll give you one. But I'll be my monster, not yours. Not the Imperium's, not Chaos's, mine alone." He crushed out his cigarette and began walking. Toward what, he didn't know yet. But for the first time since arriving in this universe, Alucard felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Curiosity. And in the grim darkness of the far future where there was only war, maybe curiosity was the most dangerous weapon of all. The 41st millennium had seen countless horrors, demon princes who'd ascended through depravity, Xenos empires that predated human civilization, technological abominations from the Dark Age. The Imperium had survived them all through stubborn refusal to die, grinding forward on mountains of corpses and oceans of faith. But Alucard was something different. He wasn't a conqueror seeking dominion. He wasn't a destroyer craving apocalypse. He was simply an immortal who'd found himself in a universe that had forgotten how to surprise him and had decided to return the favor. In the months and years that followed, reports would filter through Imperial channels, whispers of the creature in red who appeared without pattern or purpose, a chaos cult annihilated on one world, a corrupt cardinal dragged screaming from his cathedral on another. Workers mysteriously escaping Forge world slavery, Genestealer patriarchs found torn apart in impossible ways. The Inquisition tried to track him. Failed. The Mechanicus attempted to calculate his patterns, found only quantum uncertainty. The Chaos Gods watched with fascination and frustration, unable to predict or control something that existed in superposition. And through it all, Alucard walked alone. No master, no cause, no grand design. Just an immortal monster who'd decided that in a universe built on suffering, the most radical act was occasional, unpredictable mercy. He never found his worthy death. Perhaps he never would. But he found something else. A purpose born not from duty or destiny, but from simple choice. To be chaos, lowercase c, in a galaxy that had calcified into brutal orders. To remind the Imperium that humanity was worth more than its capacity to suffer. To prove that even in the grim darkness of the far future, someone still remembered what it meant to choose. The no-life king had found a new throne, the shadows themselves, from which he'd judge both gods and mortals alike. And the 41st millennium would never be quite the same.